in a free society, you have a right to your life, you have a right to your liberty, and you ought to have a right to keep what you earn and a benefit, how you benefit from your own effort. Then, of course, you have responsibility to take care of yourself, your family, your friends, your neighbors, your community, and work through your church. And I'm just so convinced that that's the way you have prosperity. But this idea of rights has to be clarified, or we can't solve our problem.
Well, so there are people that are concerned that Congress really isn't listening to them when so many people have said, we do not want Obamacare, and they still pass it. They sense a feeling of arrogance from Congress that we know better what's right for you and what you need.
Yeah, I think I can understand that, but a lot of times people don't understand when they say that, they feel that way. But up until now, since this debate has really been going on, a much better debate on medical care, the Congress does pretty much listen to the people. The people they want all this stuff, and they endorse our foreign policy. They've endorsed our financial system and the Federal Reserve. They've generally endorsed this. They haven't thrown the people out of Congress for it, and they could have.
I know.
So, but we're in transition now, and that's why I think people have a right to be very annoyed and frustrated, because I think it's shifted from the acceptance of the government we've had to the point now where I think we are becoming to the majority, but we haven't cleaned up Washington yet. And that's why when I leave Washington, I become more optimistic. When I'm in Idaho, I'm more optimistic. When I'm in Washington, they haven't heard enough yet to change their way, but it's coming.
When you're in Idaho, we're more optimistic too. So what do you think is going to happen with, you brought all this attention to the Federal Reserve and auditing the Federal Reserve. What do you think is the future in terms of our fiscal policies and our bogus currency?
In the short run, it's going to get a lot worse, because the Congress, they give a little bit of lip service to overspending, but if they cared, we wouldn't have Obamacare. But if the Republicans really cared, they wouldn't be, for instance, building an embassy in London.
Oh.
It cost $1 billion. They build huge embassies in Baghdad and Kabul, and we police the world. If they really cared, they would look at that stuff. But they're locked in on that kind of spending. Democrats are locked in on medical care. Both are locked into making the Department of Education bigger. Republicans doubled the size of the Department of Education. So it's going to come to an end. It's going to get worse. Then it will have to end in a financial crisis. Well, we've had the financial crisis. The next crisis will be the dollar crisis, where this quits functioning. And I think I see early signs now that interest rates are starting to rise, and you're going to see prices starting to rise. And we are locked in on not allowing the proper correction that is necessary for us to go back to work. We're propping up all the mistakes and all the debt that was developed over the last 30 or 40 years. So therefore, this is going to be a while, but I think the people are waking up, and the fact that we have their attention on the Federal Reserve, eventually the reforms are going to come. They have to. Otherwise, if there's nothing left, you're free. The only way that can hold this together is more dictatorship, or a complete dictatorship. So, and I don't think the American people are ready for that, so I think they're going to eventually demand more reforms, and hopefully they'll be all positive.
Do you think we're going to have inflation the way we did in the 70s and leading to all kinds of crazy?
I think it could get a lot worse than the 70s. I mean, you can't create double and triple the money supply in 1 year and think that it won't eventually affect prices. And one thing people don't want to admit is inflation is a lot more prevalent than I realize. I mean, the cost of certain things still are going up rapidly. Education costs. I mean, if you're sending some kids to school now, those costs aren't going down. And medical care, that's the main problem with medical care. It costs too much. If it didn't cost very much, people wouldn't be complaining. And we still have pretty good medical care, but if it didn't cost so much, so that's inflationary. The whole thing is when they print a lot of money, all prices don't go up the same way. But I think you're going to see a lot more, and that's when printing money and running up debt just makes everything worse. Right now, they're still printing money, they're still spending it, and foreigners are still loaning us money, and we're bailing out everybody. But if that would work, and the dollar would remain the dollar standard of the world, Americans shouldn't have to work again. Why work?
Yeah.
Why don't we just print money and spend it and get our services and our oil and everything else by just printing money? There's a limit to it, and I think we're just getting to the point where those limits are getting awfully close.
I've heard people say that there is a concern that if we even return to a gold standard, that the Congress will just start confiscating gold and silver.
Yeah, that's why it'd be much better to have the market determine it.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, some people are already on a gold standard.
Mm-hmm.
They understand this and they want savings. I know people that go out and buy silver every month. So that's sort of the market way of doing it. But if you go back, Milton Friedman and I used to have this argument, and of course he was a monetarist. He says you shouldn't print so much money, but gold isn't any good because the government always abuses it. They'll either take the gold in or abuse the gold standard, which is true. They can, and that's what Roosevelt did. They abused the gold standard. They took the gold in and they printed a lot of money. So it does depend on the character of the people who are in government. But if you look at the positive side, we were on sound money. They followed the Constitution all the way up, from the beginning. The last vestige of the linkage of our dollar to gold was up to 1971. So there were restraints on printing money up until 1971. So most of our history, we have lived with that. And that means that we could do it again, but we could have a better monetary standard, because there was a little confusion back in the 19th century because of they had what they call bimetallism, and they had gold and silver, and they fixed the price between the two, and that's not a good economic policy. So actually you don't have to go back to a gold standard. You can go to hard money, which is a natural money. This is what people choose in primitive society, and anytime you have to get back to sound economics, you have to pick something of real value. When the system breaks down, people don't trade with pieces of paper. Mm-hmm. In wartime and all, people who escaped from Vietnam, they had a lot of paper money, but nobody wanted it. They got out if they held gold. So no, they will and can go back, but there's no reason why we can't even have a better standard of money than we did even in the 19th century.
I keep thinking about what future generations are going to have to deal with. We had 2 grandbabies born this last year, and before they left the hospital, they had 2 things. They had a Social Security number and an incredible debt, and they hadn't even, had their first
I was
teeth.
Astounded when I had the first, and I had more than one. The parents came, and their interest was, how can they deliver their child without getting the Social Security number? They didn't want that
Mm-hmm.
number.
Yeah.
And they talk, and some of them actually do go out and they deliver at home, just to do it. But that doesn't solve the problem, because, I've seen some people do this, and then when they get to be teenagers, they can't get a driver's license.
That's right.
You can't go to college. And I mean, it is so ingrained. It's sort of like trying to operate without the post office, or try to get on an airplane without subjecting yourself to being frisked every time,
Mm-hmm.
this sort of thing. So it's very hard to avoid all these regulations. You have to change them. But right now, the people are getting frustrated enough. Maybe we'll get some of that done one of these days.